I wanted to start out with an interesting, or I think it's interesting. I wanted to start out with a question, and I think I've already told this to you guys, but for the sake of people that will watch it in the future, hopefully it'll be new for some, if not all. So, do any of you know the connection between the goldfish and sales?
Attention span.
Yes. Why?
Because we only have, I forget what the number is, but it's like 15 seconds to maintain the attention of a client.
So one of the reasons that, or one of the things that Jordan Belfort talks about in his book, and I think it was called The Way of the Wolf. Honestly, I don't even remember now. I think it's called The Way of the Wolf. He also wrote The Wolf of Wall Street, but The Way of the Wolf is about his selling system, which he calls the straight line selling system. And if you want to hear straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak, you can go on YouTube and find some content there. But one of the things that he talks about, and it's interesting because I talked about it before I ever heard from him, it is about attention span. And the reason I use the goldfish is because the average attention span, at least when the study was done, the average attention span of a goldfish is
like 7 seconds, 8 seconds?
8 seconds. The average attention span of a human being is... So we as a large sentient individual can't even manage the attention span of a goldfish. So if you can't get a goldfish to pay attention to you, what hope do you have for a human being, right? And then another interesting thing that he talks about in the book is he talks about, how much time you actually have to get someone's attention. And most people don't realize this, but the sale in person is made within the first basically 10 seconds. People form an impression of you, your tone, your pitch, your dress, everything about you. We can say, hey, don't judge a book by its cover, but let's be honest. When we look at people, guys, especially when we look at a girl, guys look them up, some guys look them up and down, come up with a score. I don't do that, but some guys do. I don't remember back in their college days. Oh, she's a 7. Oh, look at that talent, right? So if you think about that in a less sexual manner, everybody apprises who they come across, right? The minute when you're walking down the mall, our brain is constantly categorizing, and whether you realize it or not, you have both an emotional as well as an intellectual reaction to the people that you're walking past, their dress, the things going on around you. Our brains are wired, so we filter out most of that stuff. Most of that stuff we're not conscious of. But if somebody said, hey, what did you think about blah, blah, blah? You'd be like, what? Oh, you mean that person that? Oh, yeah. Right? And then you can say what you thought about that person. Well, the reality is when you're knocking on a door, and I use knocking on a door euphemistically, right? I'm going to just talk about how we present ourselves to somebody that we're talking to for the first time. There's really only 2 ways that happens. One is over the phone, and 2 is in person. In person, and I don't remember the name of the study, he mentions it. Some people say it's been debunked. Other people say it's totally valid, but you've probably heard it before. And it's basically some variation of 55% of your communication is body language, 35% is tonality or pitch, but only 10% of it is actually the words that you use. Now, that's not to say that you can't say the wrong words, because you can, because some words will trigger, right? You've heard of triggering, right? And I don't mean it in a snowflake millennial kind of way, but certain words will trigger certain types of emotion, right? So you want to be careful about the words that you use, because you don't want to trigger or create the wrong impression. So what Jordan talks about is he gets in a little bit more into the data and science. I was a little bit surprised, actually. He talks about attention span, how much time you have to make that first impression. All those things are important. I kind of wrote this little thing down as a kind of a reminder or something to think about. the sales is a game, okay? It's a physical, mental, and emotional game. High performance individuals have to be optimally performing in all three zones, right? 9 times out of 10, oh, we might get somebody joining. Okay, hang on. Sending it. Sorry, we'll pause here for a second. One of my buddies wants to jump in. Let me see if I can get him on here. Oops, that's not what I wanted to pause. I was trying to pause the recording. Let's see. Man, I was on a roll too, or at least I thought I was anyway.
You're rolling.
Although it could be a dinner roll, right? Although I'm not eating, so I guess not.
Dude, when you're fasting, everything makes you think of food, right?
Oh, dude, everything is so much more intense, right?
The smells.
Like, I have way less patience. I have much stronger reactions to certain things maybe than I should, right? Because I'm emotionally, at some level, you're kind of emotionally overloaded, right? Like everything's sensitive.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess we'll see if Tony logs in. If Tony comes online. He is a mortgage and real estate sales professional in Phoenix, Arizona, or actually Scottsdale, I should say. Scottsdale, not just Phoenix. Scottsdale. It's very, 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 very posh.
She.
That's right. They've got lots of she sheds for Cheryl there. Anyway, so back to, I think I sent him the link. Let's see. Can I pull up the invitation link in the meeting or no? Do you know if there's a way to do that, Shane? Do you remember?
If you go on, if you click on invite, then your contacts will show up there, or you can click
invite.
email.
Hey.
Yeah.
Gmail.
And then, I mean, he'd have to, join through that link, but.
Oops. Hey. Okay, sorry about that little kerfuffle there. Okay, so back to what maybe you can help me get back on track here. So we were talking about
body language, words versus physicality.
Right. So it's actually more important how you present yourself, whether that's over the phone audibly or in person, which has both an audible as well as a physicality component, right? How are you presenting yourself? If you show up wearing wrinkled clothes, people are either gonna like listen to you out of pity, or they're gonna be like, get the hell away from me, because I don't know, they don't like to help people, right? So one of the things that Jordan Belfort talks about is he's like, you've got to be up, you've got to be positive. It's kind of like if I call up the phone and I'm talking to Shane, I'm gonna say, hey, is Shane there? Right? As opposed to, hi, I'm leaving Mr. Morza, or is it, or they? I mean, I'm overemphasizing my emphasis for the point of making the point, right? If you sound up, positive, people pay attention to that, and they're more likely to listen to you than if you're too soft. They can't hear you. Now there is a time and a place for being, using a whisper, like when you want to tell somebody something, get them to kind of lean in and like, listen, you got to understand, right? This is super important, right? You can actually lower your voice for emphasis, which communicates the concept of I'm telling you a secret, right? That can actually be more impactful than being like, oh my goodness, and guess what you get for $39.99? It'll be so amazing, right? I mean, people don't really respond to that kind of overblown emotionalism anymore.
Except children.
That is true. You can get children excited, right? Hey, there's a child in every one of us. I mean, some of us will still respond to some of that stuff. So I'm going to send my notes to Shane from the book, but the straight line selling system has 5 components to it, and the first 3 are what he calls the 3 key tests. And the 3 key tests are, number 1, your prospect must love your product. Number 2 is your prospect must your prospect must trust and connect with you. Number 3, your prospect must trust and connect with your company. Wow, that's more of a tongue twister. That's more of a tongue twister than I was anticipating. Thank you, Jesus. Got through that. All right. So the reality is, like, you know, when you're talking to people, you could almost ask them, look, on a scale of 1 to 10, you know, what's your level of interest in the product? The words that you move, right? Or on a scale of 1 to 10, how am I doing here? Are you picking up what I'm putting down? You want to internally try to gauge that on your part, but you could actually ask somebody in the course of chatting with them, hey, where are we at? What do I need to do, right? How do I get you to a 10, right? People will run from fear, they run from pain, and they run towards pain and pleasure and comfort. So if you can help somebody be comfortable with you, comfortable with the product, and comfortable with your company, they're more likely to purchase. But somebody who's a 5, I'm comfortable, yeah, whatever, I'm kind of ambivalent, yeah, I like you, I don't dislike you, they're less likely to buy. But you move them to a 10 in all 3 areas, you're more likely to be able to trigger the sale. So the words that you need, the words that you use, the illustrations that you use, they really need to help move you towards a 10 on each scale. What's the number 1 question that somebody asks that immediately tells you it's a sales call?
How much are you willing to invest?
No. It's usually the first thing that they say, hey, or let's see, hey, my name's Ben. Is John there? John gets on the phone. Hey, John, this is Ben. What do most people say after that?
Like, how are you today, or something like that?
Yes, exactly. The minute you say, how are you doing today, that absolutely says small talk, salesperson, not interested. I'm zoning out, tuning out, hanging up, see you later, bye-bye, right? So you have to, if you're going to be having a sales conversation, whether that's a job interview, you are, I don't know, you're asking for a discount at a restaurant, you want a discount on clothes, you want to sell somebody on whatever, right? The number 1 turnoff, like, I don't want to say universally, but almost everybody can figure out, oh, this is a sales call, right? Because why are you saying, how are you? Like, I don't know you from Adam. Why the F do you care? You know, when I'm training guys on how to knock doors, I tell them, look, there are 2 questions on people's minds when you knock on their door, right? Because you're interrupting them in their domain. Question number 1 is, why the F are you at my door? And who the F are you? Right? Now, some people will be very agitated, right? And some people are going to be like, you know, but at the end of the day, it all boils down to that basic emotion, right? You know, why are you here, right? And that's why your appearance, your tonality, how you come across as somebody I need to listen to, or you come across as somebody I need you to get off my front porch because you clearly don't know what you're doing, right? So you can either talk with the air of authority and positivity, or you can talk with the air of, I'm not sure what I'm doing here, and God forgive me for interrupting your life. You know, if I'm at your door, you know, there's something you need to learn. Like, I don't waste my time walking around talking to strangers because I like it. I do it because they need my help, they need my service, and if they don't get my help, they're very likely to get screwed or not even understand that their property is being devalued, et cetera, right?
So is there an opening line that you recommend for phone or for in-person contact?
You need to answer those 2 questions. So for example, you know, I sell storm restoration, right? So when I knock on somebody's door and they open the door, and they say, you know, some variation of, can I help you? Who are you? What's up? Right? You know, everybody, you know, because I've been selling for a really long time, I try to take my cues from that person. I pay attention to the property when I'm walking up to it. You know, what am I observing? Do they have, like, I don't know, like a Packers flag in the front yard? I mean, are there cars in their house plastered with Ohio University or Michigan stuff, right? Whatever. You know, I don't know those things, but if they had a University of Michigan, like, oh, my dad went and lived in Detroit, and I got family that went there. So you're a big Michigan fan, huh? Right? You know, sometimes talking about something briefly about why you're not related to why you're there just helps breaks the ice and get people comfortable. But, you know, if you drag it on too long, people will get irritated, and they're like, you know, can you get to the point, please? Because, like, I was eating, or I was watching my show or whatever, and you interrupted me, and I'm very politely standing here, so you can please stop wasting my time. You know, when you're calling somebody on the phone, how do we approach somebody? Well, you should be looking at their LinkedIn profile, paying attention to their company. There's other things that you can, you know, creep them on Facebook, see if you can learn anything about them, right? A lot of people have public profiles. The point isn't because you're trying to figure out how to date the person, right? The point is you're trying to figure out if there's points of commonality that you can use when you're talking to that person. So whenever I open, and I'm like, hey, my name's Ben. Do you have a couple of minutes? Is now a good time to talk? Right? Because you're demonstrating respect. You're not assuming that they've got time now. And sometimes people will be relieved. They're like, oh, fantastic. But most people will be like, sure, I got a few minutes. What's going on? Right? Then you need to communicate in a 30-second elevator pitch why you're there, why you're calling them, why you're interrupting their life. As long as you do that stuff, if you get through the first 30 to 45 seconds in good fashion, you are 90% of the way towards making the sale, because they've already paused long enough and they've already decided that they like you enough to stand there and talk to you. The likelihood that you'll make the sale just continues to increase the longer you're there. But that first minute is absolutely critical. If you don't do well in the first 20 to 30 seconds, you know, they say, I think it's like you need 8 positive impressions to overwhelm a negative one. And if you've already triggered them on the first one in less than a minute, the odds that you'll have 7 or 8 positive interactions after that, probably not very good. I mean, unless you're just having a bad day. I mean, I guess it's possible. And I follow up multiple people all the time. I follow up multiple times with people all the time, but sometimes you can just get a sense that people just don't like you, right? Like, okay, dude, you clearly have an issue, or ma'am, I'm sorry, something I said really torqued you. I don't know, does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
Another thing to understand, you know, outside of the fact that the words that you use need to move people towards 10 on the scale, is that objections are just a smokescreen of certainty. And that's really kind of paraphrasing Jordan Belfort's terminology. He calls it certainty, right? On those first 3 key tests, how certain are you on a scale of 1 to 10, right? If somebody has an objection, what they're really doing is they're saying, tell me more. They're not saying that. What they're saying is, I don't believe you, or I don't quite get X, Y, Z, right? So when somebody throws up an objection, whatever that is, or like, you know, like, well, I don't know if I see the value here. You know, you want to stop, pause, repeat back to them what you've heard them say so that they understand that you're hearing them and that it's important. And then depending on what it is, that, like, if it's something like, I don't see the value, say, James, I am so sorry. I hope you can forgive me because I just haven't been effective enough at explaining the value to you. Can you give me a couple of minutes to go back and explain why I see this as really critical and valuable for you and your family, your business, your life, whatever, right? So an objection gives you permission to loop, right? Go back to the information because it's either something about the product, or it's something about you, or it's something about your company. And Jordan Belfort talks about looping, right? An objection just gives you the chance to reset on whatever that key component is. Then the other two pillars of his system is what he calls the 2 keys to communication strategy. 1 is the invisible force, and 2 is the pain threshold. And the invisible force is the invisible force that prevents a purchase. In other words, their action threshold is probably another way to put it, right? So action threshold and their pain threshold. So people, you want to move somebody's action threshold from high to low. In other words, you want to lower the bar to entry, right? And the reality is that what they've discovered is that the action threshold is malleable and movable for every person in every situation, right? Because what's your action threshold? Your action threshold is based on a combination of beliefs about how you make decisions. It's your beliefs on how you make buying decisions more specifically. And when you talk about buying decisions, you're also talking about attitudes about money, right? Your attitude about money and your attitude about a buying decision, they might actually conflict. And if that's the case, you may have a lot of conflict in your financial life. And then they also have ideas, perceptions, or feelings about salespeople selling to them, right? They say that the easiest people to sell to are salespeople. Why? Well, this is what we do for a living. We want to be persuaded. Whereas somebody who's like, yeah, I don't know, an accountant and they're the king of data, they don't understand that they had to sell somebody to get their job. They had to sell somebody on buying their car at the price they wanted, whatever, right? They just handle the buying. They just handle that sales process differently. But it doesn't mean that you can't get there with them, right? They may have a seemingly or a perceptively higher threshold for action, but if you can speak their language, you can bring that threshold down, right? Well, at the same time you're bringing the action threshold down, you need to increase the pain threshold, because just because you have a low action threshold doesn't mean you're going to pull the trigger. Buying a candy bar is a pretty low action threshold, right? But just because I'm standing there in the convenience store doesn't mean I'm going to buy it. So what do they do to try to trigger your action threshold, right? They 2 for 1. Get the king size double candy bar for the price of 1, right? And that doesn't say that, but I mean, you don't have a video, but you've got the little tags or whatever. And then everybody has that internal salesman, right? When they're looking at marketing material, everybody has a voice that they read in, and it's not usually, I mean, it might be theirs, but not usually, right? If you think back to when you were a kid, usually the commercials that impacted you are the ones that have a tendency to influence how you perceive all those things in the future. If you've had particularly positive or particularly negative selling, buying experiences in your past, whether as a teenager or as an adult, those will have significant impacts on how they interact with people in the future. Sometimes you might want to try to unpack things a little bit, because if you keep getting objections, right, smoke screens, but you're still in the presentation, you're going to have to figure out what the problem is. And the only way you can uncover that is with quality questions. Pain threshold is, people move away from what creates pain and towards whatever they believe will solve their problem. So the pain threshold to me is really about creating urgency, right? What's another way to create urgency? I don't know. My tires are starting to get a little low on tread on the back. And I was kind of paying attention to that, right? But on my last trip to Chicago, I looked at my front tires and I'm like, oh my God, my tires are going bald, right? So my pain threshold for getting tires went from, I'm going to have to get some soon, to, oh my God, I can't drive back to Richmond. I can't drive back to North Carolina or Virginia until I replace my tires. So there are things that increase our pain, because I don't want to have a blowout and run off the road at a really bad place. Plunging down the side of a mountain doesn't thrill me, right? Even on skis. Versus, hey, I know I'm going to have to do this soon, but, the tread hasn't worn down that far yet. I'd like to get where I'm not always down to the steel belts on my tires. So just to reiterate, let's reconnect with what those 5 core elements are again. Love the product, trust and connect to you, trust and connect with your company, lower the action threshold, increase the pain threshold. So I'm just looking at these notes. I kind of took them in sequence. You've got to take immediate control of the sales encounter, and he says you actually have 4 seconds to do that. In 0.25 seconds in person, somebody is making a judgment about you, whether or not they want to listen to you, talk to you. And then it takes 5 seconds to finalize that impression. Over the phone, you've got 4 seconds. Then at the most, you have 10 seconds to recover or cement that impression. And this is universally human. It doesn't matter what culture you're in. Doesn't matter if it's Japan, Africa, Russia, China, the United States. Doesn't matter. It's universally human. They've done the tests. It's the same for everyone. Obviously, we all talk different languages, literally, but this emotional, I guess I would call it an emotional mental thing, is an absolute universal truth. So how do you deal with this? You want to present that you are sharp as a tack, enthusiastic as hell, and expert in your field. That's why I do well when I'm outdoors. People just like, I'm positive, I know what I'm talking about, and people just figure that out when they're listening to me. Perception management, it takes 8 subsequent positive impressions to overcome a negative impression. Most sales encounters don't provide that. He lists the parts of communication as tonality, modality, and I guess I should come up with something else for words that rhymes with ality, huh? Verbosity. 45% tone, 45% modality, which is body language, and 10% of the words. Then he says that there's 10 tonalities and 10 modalities. I didn't write them down. I don't remember that he actually went into all of that, but it would definitely be something that's interesting to look into. Basically, universally, communication styles break down into 10 and 10. So maybe we can look at that in the future. You really need to look like something that I've come to understand in the last probably 5 to 6 years that I really didn't understand in the first 15 years. Like first 15 years of my life, I was good at sales, but there was just some of it I just didn't understand. Like, I don't understand why it works for some people and not for others. Like, why doesn't everybody just buy from me? Like, just buy from me. I got what you need. Like, why would you not sign on the dotted line, right? Like, to me, I assume the sale to the point that I'm surprised when people don't buy a little bit, but I'm a little bit more in tune now than I was. You know, being confident is important, but if you're so confident that you're missing the signals that people are giving you, then you're literally just wasting your time, and you don't want to do that, right? So emotional connection is 45-45 for the emotional decision. I don't even remember why I wrote that down. I guess what I'm saying here, or what he was saying is really what I'm saying is that, I don't know if you realize this, but people make the decision to purchase emotionally first. It has nothing to do with either logic, rationality, right? It's emotional first. Now, some people are more susceptible to getting excited and pulling the trigger, but at the end of the day, how you feel about the purchase has more to do with whether or not that takes place than anything else. And if somebody has an incredibly high negative impression about making a purchase of the product or taking that step or whatever, then if you can't overcome that negative impression, they're not going to make that buying purchase. It doesn't matter how much logic you put in front of them. You're not going to be able to overwhelm. You can't overwhelm emotion with logic. Logic, a lot of times, is how people support or rationalize or explain the emotional decision that they made. Now, I'll use this in what I call the warm down phase, like when somebody makes the commitment to sign and they're signing. You know, you might say something like, hey, I just want to let you know that future you is going to thank current you or present you for making this decision, because I think when all is said and done, you're going to have that peace of mind. You're going to feel really good about it because, and then you want to remind them of the things that were important as to why they're making the decision. And the warm down is emotional, not logical. It is first emotional, it's second logical, right? And you want to ask questions that are tie downs like, that makes sense, doesn't it? Are you picking up what I'm putting down? like, hey, you know, sometimes people get lost because they say I'm a little bit too wordy. Are you like, does what I'm saying make sense to you, or do you need me to explain it a little bit more? Right? So words are 10% logic-based decisions. Now, if you screw up the emotional connection, I guess he was talking about tone and modality are about emotional connection and the emotional decision-making, but your words, you know, only 10% of your complete message has anything to do with being logic or basing the decision being based on logic, right? If you make a mistake in either, whether it's your 45-45, your tonality, your modality, or if you make a mistake on your words, if you trigger somebody with bad word choice, like I tell people, don't send somebody a contract. You're sending them an agreement. They're not signing a contract. They're authorizing an agreement, right? Massive difference, right? Because a lot of people, when they hear contract, think, oh, attorney. And if it's somebody with money, they're going to be like, oh, I need to have my attorney review this. Why? No, you don't. Like, the only reason you're going to need an attorney is if for some reason we get at odds. And is there anything that you don't understand? Well, I'm going to deliver what I've promised. And this is the safeguard that says I'm going to deliver what I've promised to you. Does that make sense? That makes sense, doesn't it?
Makes sense.
And then I didn't take too many notes on it, but you know, I talked about how this sales or selling is a physical game, it is a mental game, it is an emotional game, right? You know, sales is built on the no, and we need to get people efficiently to say no so that we're not wasting our time trying to sell somebody who really isn't going to buy anyway. Like, I don't know how many times you found yourself in a conversation with somebody trying to sell your service that just went 30 or 45 minutes too long because you just kept droning on and on about how awesome you were, or you let them drone on and on about their problems, but you never made the pivot or turn. You weren't able to control the conversation such that you were able to take what they were saying and then tie it back to how what you've got solves their problem. You know, just having a conversation for the sake of having a conversation is great, but most people aren't having a business selling conversation for the sake of making friends. Now, your clients may become friends at some level, but at the end of the day, it's still a commercial relationship and you need to provide value. And if you're not efficiently moving them towards making the decision, then that's also bad. That's not only bad for you from a business standpoint, but it's bad for them from a time standpoint, right? So part of how you manage all of that, you know, managing your own emotions, right? Like, how do I stay up? How do I stay positive? He talks about NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, in terms of how to make sure that you're managing your communication right. And then he also talks about something called anchoring, where like you can set your mood or put yourself in a certain state mentally speaking. And he talks about a product called Boom Boom, which is basically a, like I thought it was an aerosol. I bought a pack of it, and it's literally kind of like a smelling salt, right? You just open it, take a whiff of it. And the way it works is you have to, as he puts it, organically put yourself in a high state of euphoria. Like, I don't know, if your team won the Super Bowl, like when that happens, take a whiff, right? You're setting an anchor. If you, I don't know, you hit 100 push-ups for the first time and that totally, like, you're euphoric, take a hit. You have your favorite dessert and it just, you remember your youth and life and things are good and I'm in front of the fire and it's awesome, and, right? Set the anchor. Why is that important? Because before you go into a sales meeting or a big meeting, you can set your emotion. Once you've organically set that anchor, then all you have to do to put yourself in that emotional state, because our emotions are more strongly tied to our sense of smell, I guess, than anything else. Like out of the five senses, smell seems to be more emotionally connected to our emotional state than the other senses are. Like the smell of cookies, warm cookies, for some people reminds them of their grandmother's kitchen at Christmas. Like that kind of a concept, right? Or if you smell snickerdoodles, you're like, oh, Christmas, right? And then your mind emotionally has a, you know, your mind emotionally colors your environment with all of that stuff. Some people don't feel that positivity because they had a negative upbringing. But for somebody like me, you know, Christmas lights, warmth, good feelings, right? So that's why, you know, when you're interacting with people, you want to find out what's their, you know, find out what's their profession. I always ask people what their profession is, because if I know what their profession is, I'm a well-read person, so I know a lot. I know a little bit about a lot of things. And usually if somebody tells me what their profession is, just because I was in the staffing business, I can usually come up with an illustration, or I can come up with an analogy that helps me tie what I do to what they do. That way I can have that emotional connection of, oh, he gets me, right? Now, they may not verbalize it in their head that, oh, he gets me, but when the light comes on and they're kind of like, oh, like people lean in, they give you the body language, you get it, you feel it, you know, all that fun stuff.